are in an emergency.
We are observing you crossing the 260 of Lima at 31 miles west. Level is 10,700, velocity...
October 1996. A state-of-the-art passenger jet careens out of control for 30 horrific minutes, then crashes into the Pacific Ocean.
I've got it! I've got it!
Climb Aeroperú 603.
We're gonna turn over!
What could have brought down Aeroperú Flight 603? The answer to the mystery may be found in the aircraft's black box flight recorder, a puzzle which investigators must solve. The story they uncover is how a simple human error set off a chain of events that ended in tragedy.
2 cents of American money brought down a $75 million aircraft and killed 70 people.
This kind of a problem that they faced that night was probably one of 10 over the last 20 or 30 years.
You never lose hope immediately. You know, it takes time for you to get to that point that you will accept the fact that there's no people that got out of their life.
We're gonna turn over!
Lima, Peru. Jorge Chavez International Airport. Aeroperú Flight 603 prepared for takeoff to Santiago, Chile. The plane was a 4-year-old Boeing 757, a state-of-the-art passenger jet known for its reliability and safety. Aeroperú 603 was flown by 2 of the national airline's best pilots, Captain Eric Schreiber, 58, and First Officer David Fernandez, 42. 61 passengers and 9 crew members were aboard. Most were Chileans on their way home. Others were Peruvian, British, Italian, Spanish, 1 New Zealander, and other Latin Americans. Among them, the brother-in-law and close friend of Mexico businessman, Monas Albert.
Our companies do business in South America. We export. And every so often we will go to see our clients, and on this trip, Kenny and Abraham went to see some clients in Peru and in Chile. I had a very good relationship with both of them. With my brother-in-law, of course, we were like brothers. I love the guy. He married my only sister, so we had a great relationship.
Checklists complete. First Officer Fernandez hailed the tower.
Lima Tower, Aeroperú 603, runway 15, ready for takeoff.
Aeroperú 603, use noise abatement.
Wind calm, ready for takeoff on runway 15.
1515, transponder.
Flaps 15, takeoff briefing complete.
The captain makes a joke about their precision.
See how accurate we are? Not even Swiss.
Rolling.
The Aeroperú 757 was among a new generation of computer-controlled aircraft in which pilots are trained to rely on a central data system designed to reduce errors, both mechanical and human. On takeoff, the 757 performed perfectly.
80 knots.
Check.
V1, rotate. V2.
Gear up.
Within moments, the pilots received a highly unusual
V2
reading.
plus 10.
The altimeters are stuck.
The altimeter indicates the height of the aircraft off the ground. It read 0, though they were obviously flying.
The altimeters have stuck.
Yeah,
All of them.
this is really new. Keep V2 plus 10.
The 757 is equipped with 3 altimeters, one for pilot, one for co-pilot, one backup. All 3 were dead. Then they lost another crucial instrument, the airspeed indicator.
The speed.
Eh?
The speed.
What's going on? We're not climbing.
No, I am climbing, but the speed.
Hold it. Maintain speed.
Aeroperú 603 left the lights of Lima, out towards the Pacific Ocean. With no airspeed or altitude instruments, the pilots were now flying blind. The air traffic controller in Lima maintained contact with the plane, noting its altitude and course. He did not hear when the pilots got a new minor warning that they must adjust the rudder, which steers the aircraft left and right.
603. We are descending.
Rudder ratio.
That's strange. Turn to the right.
Alan McLeod is a veteran Air Canada pilot.
They got a rudder ratio warning, which consists of an amber light that would come flashing on there with a little beeping horn and a message on this engine crew alerting system saying rudder ratio. That's just a system that reduces the amount of rudder the airplane has that can be used as the airplane accelerates and goes faster and faster. Because it was sensing wrong or improper information, it sensed a fault, so it gave a warning to the crew.
The erratic warnings were being generated by the plane's central computer, but the pilots could not understand why. Then, the dead altimeters sprung to life.
Climb, 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 climb.
I am.
Climb. You're going down, David.
I am up, but the speed.
Yeah, but it's stuck. Mach trim, rudder ratio. Climb, 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 climb. Set heading 100. Well, now you're... It's okay on this heading.
Set the climb thrust. Center autopilot in command.
Just as suddenly, the altitude readings returned to normal. The moment of calm would be brief. Just 1 minute after takeoff, Captain Schreiber attempted to engage the autopilot to give them time to think.
There is no command.
The autopilot requires identical data from 2 of the aircraft's 3 flight control computers. But Schreiber's instrument readings were so different from those of Fernandez, the autopilot disengaged. Then another alert.
Mach trim, Mach trim.
Mach trim indicates that the plane is not flying in a level position, yet the 757 seemed to be flying normally.
Let's go to basic instruments. Everything's going to hell.
Mach speed trim is a system that trims the airplane. It changes the angle of the horizontal stabilizer in the back end of the airplane, and that has to be changed as the airplane accelerates to a higher speed. It was getting false indications, so they got a warning that they had an overspeed, which of course they didn't. That warning would consist of, again, the master caution and a master warning, which is a red light associated with an oral warning as well.
Despite confusing warnings and no autopilot, the aircraft was controllable. If necessary, Schreiber could have kept the plane aloft for hours. But he decided to land. He instructed his first officer to declare an emergency.
We are in an emergency.
Aeroperú 603, Lima.
We are declaring an emergency.
We have no basic instruments, no altimeter, no airspeed indicator. Declaring emergency.
Receive. Altitude?
We don't have. We're up to 1,000 feet, approximately 1,700.
603.
Confirm if possible if you can change your frequency to 119.7 to make sure you can receive radar instructions.
Just 40 miles from Lima, the pilots of Aeroperú 603 now made their first attempt at an emergency landing. Puzzled by their problems, they began to suspect that the Aeroperú ground crew had tampered with the aircraft.
Change to 119.7.
Auto throttle. Disconnected by itself.
It's in maintenance, move everything.
What have they done? I'll take the controls now.
Okay, you have control.
The pilots did not know that their suspicions were close to the truth. But there was no time to speculate further.
Lima, 603.
Aeroperú
603, Lima.
We request vectors for ILS.
Runway 15.
They sought the runway with the help of a guidance transmitter called the Instrument Landing System, or ILS. The ILS provides information on their course, while altitude information comes from the aircraft's transponder.
Affirmative. Maintain present altitude.
What level do we have? We have 4,000 feet. Can you confirm for us?
Correct. Maintain 4,000.
Schreiber and Fernandez had never experienced nor been trained for this emergency.
Auto throttle disconnect.
Really, we don't have any control.
We don't have any control, not even the basics.
Let's see. Check everything.
The airplane was controllable, but you first have to diagnose what's wrong. And it's very easy from 20/20 hindsight, sitting here in a chair on a nice sunny day, to say, this is what he should have done. But in the cold, dark night with bells and whistles going off, it's very difficult to analyze conflicting information that you're getting. This kind of a problem that they faced that night was probably one of 10 over the last 20 or 30 years that has been similar to this.
Over the dark Pacific Ocean, the pilots could not determine altitude nor speed by sight. They requested that the tower help guide them in.
It's responding.
Airspeed is 0. All speeds. Right. Can you give us the airspeed, please, if you have us on the radar?
Yes, affirmative. As of 10 seconds,
It seems that you're climbing at level 6,000 at 22 miles south on heading 195.
The air traffic controller's computers calculated a correct airspeed by measuring the plane's movement over the ground.
Okay, we have that. We are on heading 190, and we have
7,000 feet on the altimeter.
Yes, correct. You are now reaching 7,000.
But neither the pilots nor the air traffic controller knew that the altitude indicated on the scope was incorrect. It was coming from the plane's erratic computer.
The traffic controller would try to help the pilot, but he was receiving the wrong information on altitude. He was receiving a wrong indication from the captain's altimeter.
The reason the air traffic control system was transmitting improper altitude readout information to the airplane was because the airplane's altimeter, through the air data computer, would send the indicated altitude that the airplane was experiencing down to the radar unit, and of course it was incorrect, and they would read it off their readout down in the air traffic control center and transmit it back to the pilots, and of course it was incorrect because they were getting incorrect information to begin with.
Investigators would later discover that Aeroperú 603 was drifting downward, while the altimeters showed them at a near constant 10,000 feet. The passengers were as yet unaware of the drama unfolding in the cockpit.
Avoid large or abrupt radar inputs. If normal left hydraulic system pressure available, left
Now Captain
hydraulic
Schreiber
system
ordered Fernandez
available.
to scan the flight
Yes,
manual
crosswind,
for some
do not attempt
explanation of the
auto land.
warnings.
Says left hydraulic system available. Yes, crosswind, do not attempt an auto land.
In Lima, the air traffic controller continued to guide Aeroperú 603 back to the ground.
Aeroperú 603, we are observing you now at level 9,200. What is your heading now?
We're heading level 205.
Affirmative.
You are turning slowly to the right, correct?
No, we are maintaining course to stay away from the coast.
With incorrect altitude information being transmitted from the aircraft to the tower, they did not realize that the plane was descending.
Your distance is 30 miles. Do you want a heading to proceed to the localizer, correct?
Correct.
We're going to suggest course north 360.
360. We have problems here reading the instruments. You're going to have to help me with altitudes and airspeeds.
If it is possible.
Okay, received.
Let's go. The approach is set.
The 757's computer sent critical warnings, information that the pilots were trained to obey, but could not trust.
Let's try to make a descent on this heading.
It's climbing.
The airspeed plummeted to below stall speed, and then raced up again.
Let's go down to 10,000 feet. Why does the speed go away so fast? Could it be the real speed?
That's what worries me. No, I don't think so. Can you verify our speed, please?
320 is indicated.
We have 350, but
The engines are on idle, but we keep accelerating and accelerating.
Okay, received.
Nerves were now stretched tight.
You can imagine the pilots, they're flying there. They don't have a true indication of the speed. They're obviously trying to fly the airplane and changing the attitude up and down. That in itself will change an indication of airspeed, although it was incorrect.
Both pilots were really confused. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to act. And they did unhuman efforts to save the aircraft. But, I mean, they were really tired and of all the work and all the confusion and all the alarms.
Fernandez suggested that they try the speed brakes, used to rapidly slow the aircraft.
Extend the speed brakes.
For a moment, it appeared to be working. Then, another warning.
All three indicators are fine on speed, fine on overspeed.
Overspeed means the plane is flying too fast. The pilots didn't believe it. But if it was right, the 757 could be torn apart. They were forced to make a decision, to speed up or slow down. If they got it wrong, 70 people would die. "15 minutes had passed since takeoff. Then the computerized brain of Aeroperú 603 sent another burst of contradictory warnings.
Rudder ratio.
can't be. Nothing's disconnecting.
All engine instruments are okay.
What can our real speed be?
The speed indications
Lima
are okay.
Tower provided their only chance of survival.
We are observing you crossing the 260 of Lima at 31 miles west. Level is 10,700. Velocity is approximately 280
over the ground.
Perfect.
The controller's altitude reading was incorrect. Junk information being generated by the 757's computers and radioed to the tower.
Overspeed.
The brakes were on, but now
There's
another
speed brakes.
overspeed warning. Then the stall warning sounded.
Let's descend.
Can't be over speed. We're still flying.
They get a stall warning that the airplane is falling out of the sky. At the same time, they got overspeed warning. Impossible to have two contradictory alarms. Either you're stalling or either you're having an overspeed. So that created more confusion. Really, this problem has never happened before. It was a new emergency.
In aviation, you always figure, what's going to kill me? What is the critical thing? Let's take care of that first. and then we'll take care of the other lesser issues later on. When you get stall warning or when you get an overspeed indication, you need to pay attention to those immediately. In this case, they were getting both a stall warning and an overspeed. Well, which is right?
First Officer David Fernandez finally realized that the odds were against a safe landing.
We request, is there any plane that can take off and rescue us?
Acknowledged. Rescue has been alerted.
Any plane in the area to guide us?
An Aeroperú that may be in the area. Anybody?
No, don't say anything like that.
Yes, because right now we are in a stall.
The stick shaker vibrated violently, indicating that the 757 was going too slow and could fall from the sky.
Aeroperú 603, we have a 707 that is leaving for Putuel. We will advise him.
We are not in a stall. It's a false alarm.
Schreiber's airspeed indicator read 350 knots, well above stall speed.
No, we have stick shaker. It has to be.
But even with speed brakes and everything, we're maintaining 9,500 feet. Why aren't we getting the same reading?
When the airplane is slowed up to a point in the air that it can no longer sustain itself in flight, it stalls. The wing stalls or stops flying. There's a warning system built into the airplane that tells the pilots when that's happening. It's known as a stick shaker, along with a voice warning, which we just heard. When the stick shaker goes off because the airplane is slowed down too much, you get a warning like this, where the control column is shaking and vibrating, along with the voice warning saying that the airplane is stalling, and of course the pilots would go into the aircraft stall recovery procedure at that point.
In the battle between man and machine, the deranged 757 was winning. The pilots now had no sense of where they were or how high. They had gradually been descending and were now just 1,000 feet over the sea. Lima Tower, misguided by Aeroperú 603's incorrect transponder, reassured the pilots that they were at 10,000 feet.
Aeroperú 603, you are now flying on course 120. We observe you to be at level 10,000. Your speed is approximately 220 and a distance from Lima of 33 miles to the northwest. The 707 will be ready in 15 minutes to fly west to help you.
The pilots had to abandon their attempt at landing. The best hope now was that another aircraft could get airborne and guide the 757 back to the airport.
To have another aircraft come alongside and formate, or you formate on it, would have been one way of recovering from this abnormal situation. However, we must remember that the flight was at night and darkness. The pilots may or may not have had any formation flying training, but that would have been one way to resolve the problem quite well, actually.
Terrain. Too low. Terrain.
What's happening?
Too low. Terrain.
Now the pilots received the most terrifying warning of all. It is called the ground proximity alarm, meaning a collision with the Earth is imminent. Still, the tower told them they were at 10,000 feet.
Northwest course of 300.
We have the terrain alarm and we're supposed to be at 10,000 feet? According to the monitor, you have 105.
Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain.
There is no checklist for if you have these 7 or 8 warnings going off, which they did, and they couldn't shut them off. It's a very rattling experience. I could play that tape for you, and you hear those things: whoop whoop, pull up, terrain, terrain, and all of these things going off, and the stick shaker. Brrr. It's a very unnerving environment.
All the computers are going crazy here.
Schreiber turned the aircraft toward the sea, away from a possible collision with a mountain or skyscraper.
Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain.
Despite the erroneous warnings, the terrain alarm was correct.
There's a system on board the aircraft called the ground proximity warning system, and it senses a rate of descent in the airplane. The irony of the situation was they were getting warnings from that saying too low, terrain, terrain, too low. That probably, in all probability, was a true warning. But because they'd been subjected to so many warnings and ongoing false warnings, horns, bells, and whistles, that they didn't really, I don't think, react to that too seriously.
The air traffic controller noted Aeroperú's new course, away from Lima.
Aeroperú 603.
We observe you initiating the left turn to the west.
I don't understand you.
We observe you turning to the left, circling to the west.
Affirmative. We are heading 250, but we are going out towards sea because of the low terrain alarm.
The tower confirmed that the 757 had turned away from the airport, out toward the open Pacific.
Yes, affirmative. We observe you 42 miles, flying to the west, course 250.
We are over water, aren't we?
Affirmative. Over the water.
You are 42 miles to the west.
Now in darkness and heavy haze, the pilots had another problem with their speed.
Are we going down now?
We have 370 knots. Are we descending now?
We are showing the same speed. You have 200 knots
Speed approximately.
Speed 200 knots.
220 ground speed, reducing speed slightly.
The pilots were stunned. 200 knots was precariously close to a stall speed.
Damn, we're gonna stall right now.
Let's go up. Let's see. Let's go up here.
The two men struggled with the deadly situation. A computer that warns them of flying too fast, too slow, and too low all at once. Schreiber now decided to risk a second attempt at landing, seeking the signal known as the ILS to guide the aircraft to the runway.
I want to try to intercept the ILS. I'm trying to descend.
Lima, Aeroperú 603. We will try to intercept the ILS. Let us know if we are in.
Received, Aeroperú 603.
You show now level 9700.
The instruments seemed to be working. For a moment, there was a glimmer of hope.
This one's right.
This one's okay too.
The air traffic controller attempted to raise the pilot's spirits with good news.
Stand by to verify speed. The 707 is about to take off. It is on taxi.
Confirm our speed.
It is very important we do not have any speed indications on board.
Understood. You're starting to turn and we observe your
Ground speed at 270.
Stay there, Eric. 270 is okay.
They now knew their speed, but altitude remained fatally wrong.
altitude is 9,700. Your speed is
240 knots. Ground speed on the monitor.
How can we be flying at this speed if we're descending with engines on idle?
Give me the altitude, please.
Yes, you are maintaining 9,700 according to the scope, sir.
9,700?
Yes, correct.
What is your indicated altitude? Do you have any visual reference?
9,700, but it is indicating too low terrain. Are you sure you have us on the radar at 50 miles?
Hey, look! The 370, we have
370 what? Do we lower gear?
Aeroperú 603, Lima.
What do we do with the gear?
Suddenly, they realized the awful truth.
We're hitting water! Pull it up!
Climb Aeroperú 603. If you need to, pull up.
For 20 seconds, the pilots struggled for altitude.
I've got it! I've got it! We're gonna turn over!
Aeroperú 603, Lima. Aeroperú 603, Lima.
The next morning, Mexico businessman Monas Albert learned that an Aeroperú flight had crashed.
5 minutes after takeoff, the crew informed the tower that they were having an emergency and they requested clearance to return to Lima. During the process, contact with the aircraft was lost at 0110, with the latest position of the aircraft being 50 miles north of the city of Lima.
About 6 o'clock in the morning, I got up and turned on the news channel, and I heard there was a crash, an airplane crash of Aeroperú, but the news mentioned New York to Lima.
Rescue operations are underway by authorities. The aircraft was carrying 61 passengers and 9 crew members.
His brother-in-law and his business partner were on Aeroperú 603.
So I went to the shower and didn't pay a lot of attention. But when I came out, they corrected the news and they said from Lima to Santiago. And I knew in that plane Kenny and Abraham were flying. The news was very vague, so they mentioned there might be some survivors, and they mentioned that the plane crashed on the Pacific Ocean, and they didn't have a lot of news, and the crash was at night. So in my mind, I thought that the plane sort of landed on water and most people got out.
Guido Fernandez had just been appointed Peru's accident investigator. Aeroperú was his first case. The co-pilot, David Fernandez, was his nephew.
I was in bed. It was about 4:30 in the morning, and they called me. Your nephew is lost in an airplane. They asked me, how do you feel that your nephew was a co-pilot? My gosh, I feel very bad, but I'm a professional. I have to do a job. I have to comply and complete my duty. So that's what I did.
Fernandez rushed to the crash site in a Navy helicopter. It was clear there were no survivors. 9 bodies were floating in the debris. The rest sank with the 757. Fernandez met with the air traffic controller at Lima Tower. His account was baffling.
Well, the controller really didn't know. He was just trying to help. So he did all he could to help him. But unfortunately, for him, it was a new emergency too.
Fernandez put thoughts of his nephew out of his mind. His job was to retrieve the aircraft's flight data and voice recorders to determine what happened. He needed help. Fernandez contacted the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., the world's leading agency for air accident investigation.
They had found the aircraft. It was pretty well documented by radar. The Navy, the Peruvian Navy, had gotten a fix on the flotsam and the wreckage in the ocean. And the only thing left to do was find it on the bottom of the ocean, which they did not have the facilities for.
Rodriguez flew to Lima to join Guido Fernandez's effort to find answers.
I found out that his nephew was the first officer. I suggested that perhaps they should consider removing Captain Fernandez from the investigation because of emotional involvement and what have you.
The American investigator's concerns soon vanished.
He was very objective, I would say an excellent investigator, considering that it was, and not a distant nephew, it was his very close relative. He did an outstanding job.
The black box in the Boeing 757 can emit a locator beacon for 30 days before batteries run dead. The US Navy provided underwater remote-operated vehicles to survey the debris field, seeking the black boxes. The wreckage confirmed that the plane went down in one piece.
I've done in-flight breakups that were spread over 15, 16 miles and maybe a mile and a half wide, which tells you instantly that just what you know of looking at the wreckage, that this thing didn't hit in one piece. It clearly was disintegrating as it was crashing. But in this case, it was a fairly tight debris field, and so obviously it hit at high speed and was fairly closely knit wreckage pattern.
The data recorders were retrieved from the 757. Brought to the surface, the boxes were placed in coolers full of fresh water to keep them from oxidizing. They were taken back to Washington for analysis at the NTSB. The cockpit recorder could offer the evidence investigators sought. Every word spoken by pilots Schreiber and Fernandez, and every unnerving alarm, was recorded on audio tape. The recorded voices were faint, sometimes hard to make out, but the chaos in the cockpit rang through with chilling clarity. The tape was digitized into a computer, filtered and enhanced. Now investigators had the clue they'd been looking for.
It was clear to us that they were really experiencing a problem with airspeed and altitude, and the airspeed and altitude indications in the aircraft are strictly a function of what we call the pitot-static system.
The pitot-static system is found on all aircraft, large or small. External ports measure outside air pressure to provide data on altitude and speed. If these ports are blocked, the plane's computers receive false data and generate false warnings. But why these ports would be blocked was a mystery. Robotic vehicles searched for the missing piece of the puzzle. What they found stunned investigators. Captain Schreiber's static port was completely blocked with tape. Investigators now learned what happened. Just before Aeroperú 603 lifted off from Lima, maintenance workers cleaned the aircraft. A worker covered the static ports with tape to protect them. This is standard procedure. But he forgot to remove the tape. It was a small oversight with catastrophic results.
The taping was never removed, and when the airplane departed and started to fly, nothing but trapped static sea level air pressure was sensed by those instruments. And in matter of fact, the airplane was climbing up in thinner air, and the information presented on the instruments and to the air data computer was false, which generated just totally non-normal readings.
The inspector who was supposed to quality check his work did not do it. And the supervisor out on the line that night was not there, he was sick, and there was a regular mechanic who was filling that role. He did not see it. And the captain or the pilot, in this case the captain did the pre-flight. They do a walk around looking for just that kind of thing. The captain did the pre-flight that night and he did not detect it either.
A little piece of paper with glue caused an accident. But the paper and the glue are not to blame. Humans are to blame because humans use that tape in the wrong place for the wrong purpose.
Another accident, shockingly similar to Aeroperú 603, had happened just 8 months earlier to another 757. In February 1996, 189 people died when a German charter called Bergen Air crashed 5 miles after takeoff from Puerto Plata, Dominican Republic. The NTSB assisted in the investigation. A survey of the wreckage revealed that one pitot tube, the other critical part of the pitot-static system, was blocked. As with Aeroperú 603, night was the pilot's worst enemy. The Bergen Air pilot flipped the plane upside down before crashing into the sea.
Bergen accident clearly pointed out already that a crew will get confused by these cryptic advisories, rudder ratio, Mach airspeed trim, and not getting a clear indication what the underlying problem is, which is a problem with the air data computer or anything which comes behind it, the pitot tube or the static port. These were facts which were well known to the manufacturer, and so it happened again.
3 months after the Bergen air crash, bulletins were issued to all airline carriers about the pitot-static problems. But Aeroperú had not yet implemented the changes.
The bulletins and the, let's call it the fruits of the Dominican Republic investigation of Bergen Air had not yet reached Aeroperú at the time this accident occurred. The Peruvian government very correctly made a point of that in their report on the accident, saying that they should have given more impetus to those recommendations to get them out to the industry quicker.
Well, it's very unfortunate, but it comes back to the fact that communication in aviation is sometimes deficient. There is not that high level of exchange of information between different operators, as they're all competitors. They do not exchange certain information, and specifically not the one which is safety related. And that's definitely the case in the Aeroperú accident.
9,700, but it is indicating too low terrain.
Even if Schreiber and Fernandez had known about Bergen Air, it may not have helped them survive, given the high pressure of their situation.
We lowered gear.
It's easy to sit here in the 757 cockpit and play the Monday morning quarterback, having heard the bells and the overspeed warnings, the ground proximity warning, the stall warning. It's very easy to do that and sit here and say what I would have done being an experienced pilot. But to put yourself into the position of those two pilots that night, they were in an extremely difficult situation to fly that airplane and recover from that experience.
2 weeks after the crash, Monas Albert joined dozens of grieving families, seeking the remains of his brother-in-law and friend. He finally identified them in a Lima morgue.
I wanted to find them. I really wanted to find them. And one part of me didn't want to find them because there was this fantasy that if I don't find them, maybe they're in an island with a drink and looking at some girls dancing. I can close the chapter. I can go and take him and have him buried, and there'll be a place for the family to go and put some flowers once in a while and say, okay, my brother-in-law's here, or my dad is here, or my husband is here.
Now that investigators had the answer to the mysterious loss of Aeroperú 603, the lawsuits began. In November 1996, a Miami lawyer took on the case on behalf of 41 passengers and crew, arguing that the manufacturer, Boeing, was liable for the accident.
Boeing has to foresee the misuse of their product. In other words, the manufacturer of a product is legally liable for the foreseeable misuse of their product, if it can be corrected. In other words, Boeing builds the airplane with a potential hazard in it. That hazard is that in order to clean the airplane, you have to cover the static port. And if you don't take it off, the airplane can crash.
I wanted them back. And since I couldn't get them back, at least I wanted the wives of the victims to get compensated. How much is that worth? I don't know. I didn't know. Abraham had 3 daughters, and now they don't have a father. So what is the compensation? The best compensation, if can be done, is get them back. Give them life back again. But because that is not possible, then the other possibility is to get a monetary compensation. And then you fight for the best compensation you can get.
Boeing argued that Aeroperú was at fault, not its 757. An Aeroperú worker taped the static port, which is marked with clear warnings. Boeing also blamed Captain Eric Schreiber. It was his job to visually inspect the aircraft before taking off. But investigator Richard Rodriguez can understand how Schreiber overlooked the tape on the static port.
One of the reasons is it's very high. It's about maybe 15, 17 feet up in the air. And at night with the flashlight, and this happened to be duct tape, which you're not supposed to use. They specify the tape, and it was duct tape, which is silver. So it would not distinguish itself against the background of the fuselage of the aircraft. So basically 3 or 4 people failed to detect the tape on the aircraft prior to departure.
As the search for blame continued, the worker who taped the ports was jailed for his negligence.
Lawyers, you know, sometimes they confuse matters, and they send a guy and ask people questions and ask questions, and the one that stuck the tape was the painter, was the lowest cultured and the one that knew less about what could happen. And the judge resolved that he was the one responsible, and he was in jail.
So that you don't lose the airplane because a maintenance man making $2 an hour down in Peru makes a mistake. It's foreseeable that that kind of a person is going to make a mistake. That's human nature, they're going to make a mistake. And you build your system so you don't lose your $50 million airplane because a maintenance guy makes a simple mistake.
Schreiber and Fernandez were also scrutinized. Veteran pilot Alan McLeod believes that in their situation, he would not have attempted to land. He would have continued to fly for as long as he could, with the plane angled upward slightly and the speed set just above cruise.
Experience has shown that if you don't fly the airplane when you're experiencing an abnormal situation, and they certainly were, you must fly the airplane. Just concentrate on flying the airplane and get the airplane under control, first and foremost.
Are we going down now?
We have 370 knots.
If you don't do that, the airplane's going to bite you, and you're going to end up in more serious situations. So I would fly the airplane, make sure I was able to fly it safely, if only by using the attitude direction indicator and normal power settings that I was familiar with, and then eventually work my way back and get it on the ground.
Pilots call it flying by numbers, relying not on computers, but on basic aviation and human instinct.
It always becomes a problem when pilots are reduced to be push-buttonists. The man-machine interface has to work, and has to work as humans are to operate these airplanes. They have to be designed appropriately for the use of a human being. Of course, you can put in all digits and numbers and computer gimmicks, and you can, but still it's man who has to operate and survey it. And I believe a human being should be in charge.
In 1999, Boeing and Aeroperú decided to settle the lawsuits out of court. Families and loved ones received an exceptional settlement, averaging $1 million US per victim. The damages were high because of the terrible way the passengers and crew on Aeroperú died.
We were able to show that a lot of the people were alive. In a crash like this, a lot of the people would survive the crash and then died of drowning. There was no question in our minds that the people suffered terrible terror and pain when this happened to them. They were horrified. They were awake. They knew what happened.
The disaster helped sink Aeroperú. Combined with increased competition and rising debt, the national airline went bankrupt in 1999. Boeing increased training on pitot-static problems and issued new regulations about unapproved static port covers. Since 1996, there has not been another pitot-static failure like the one on Aeroperú 603.
The designers of these products and the manufacturers of the products know that they have to take safety into account. They have to, of course, they do that because they know it's the right thing to do. but they also know that if they don't do it, there's going to be somebody watching them that's going to investigate it, that's going to find out why it happened, and that they're going to be accountable for what they do wrong. And that if they don't take into consideration safety, they're going to have to pay for it.
Well, the accidents made the aviation industry aware that something simple like a pitot tube or a static port can cause a major incident or even an accident. And even airline pilots were reminded that this is a vital basic thing and it may happen, and this is the way how to prevent it to turn into a catastrophe.
The case was settled, the industry repented, and moved on. Such is the world of commercial aviation. But it was little consolation for those whose lives were scarred forever by an insignificant piece of tape.
It's suddenly, you say that guy doesn't exist anymore. It's very hard to swallow that. It's very hard to understand. And it took me a long time to accept it. So the memory is still there, and it will be there for a long time. I'm not going to let go. I don't want to let go.